Recently, America celebrated the 4th of July, marking its independence from British colonial rule. However, it is not alone in commemorating such a milestone. The United States and India, the world's largest democracies, share a profound bond rooted in their respective struggles for independence from British colonial rule. Over the years, US-India relations have evolved significantly, particularly in trade, technology, and regional security. But how does this bond between the two nations help shape the future of the Indo Pacific? Before we figure out how India is an important puzzle piece in the fate of the Indo Pacific, let's first understand what made the bond between the US and India as rigid as it is now. In October 1949, Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru embarked on a multi-week tour of the United States, where he met with President Harry S. Truman. This visit marked the beginning of India's formal stance of neutrality in the Cold War, a position that would shape US-India relations throughout the Cold War era by creating both opportunities for cooperation and constraints due to India's alignment with Moscow. In 1954, the United States established a strategic alliance with Pakistan as part of the Central Treaty Organization, CENTO. In response, India sought to strengthen its strategic and military connections with the Soviet Union to balance the growing US-Pakistan relationship. By 1961, India had joined the non-aligned movement as a founding member, aiming to remain neutral amid the Cold War rivalry between the US and the USSR. However, the Nixon administration's support for Pakistan during the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971 strained US-India relations, a tension that persisted until the end of the Cold War with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. In the 1990s, as the global balance of power shifted to a unipolar world dominated by the United States, India recalibrated its foreign policy and began to forge stronger ties with Washington. Currently, in the initial 2 years of Narendra Modi's administration, both India and the United States undertook careful, high-level efforts to transform their bilateral relationship. A significant milestone in this process was U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter's visit to India from April 10th to 13, which symbolized the strengthening of defense ties between the two nations and saw India agreeing in principle to sign 3 pivotal agreements. The current phase of US-India relations began after the Clinton administration's containment strategy failed to isolate India following its 1998 nuclear tests. Under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, India emerged from these sanctions as a resurgent power, prompting the United States to shift towards a policy of accommodation and to develop a strategic partnership with India. When Modi assumed office, he chose to focus on deepening US-India relations rather than letting personal disagreements with the United States hinder the relationship. This approach was evident when Modi visited the US in September 2014 at President Obama's invitation, and Obama subsequently became the first US president to be the chief guest at India's Republic Day parade in January 2015. Defense cooperation has become a cornerstone of the burgeoning US-India relationship, driven by the belief among US security officials that in light of economic slowdowns and regional security crises, the US needs to engage with rising powers like India to ensure global stability. The Modi government's push for military modernization and increased foreign direct investment in the defense sector has created opportunities for the US to strengthen defense ties with India, particularly in response to China's assertive actions in the South China Sea. The early years of the Modi administration have marked a significant turning point in US-India relations, characterized by high-level engagements and strategic defense collaborations. This revitalized partnership has been driven by a shared vision for regional stability and security, as evidenced by the landmark agreement signed and the ongoing defense cooperation between the two nations. The evolution of this relationship reflects a broader strategic realignment in response to emerging global challenges. But what can the two nations offer each other now? Why would the United States seek to strengthen its alliance with India?
And how India and the United States can ensure the vital Indo Pacific region remains free, open, prosperous, and secure.
India's muted criticism of the war in Ukraine and close partnership with Russia might suggest it isn't aligning with the West. However, increasing tensions with China have led India to balance its strategic autonomy by partnering with the US and other Western nations. This shift has seen India strengthen ties with the US, Japan, France, and Australia, diversifying its partnerships in response to regional security concerns. India's independent foreign policy continues, but it has become a reliable partner for the West due to its challenges with China. India's stance on Ukraine, while not as critical of Russia as the West would prefer, aligns with Western assessments, driven by a desire to prevent a tighter Russia-China alliance. China's threat has brought India and the U.S. closer, particularly in Indo-Pacific security. The U.S. is a significant supplier of Indian defense equipment and a key military exercise partner, with increasing cooperation on strategic issues. While India values a multipolar world, it views significant U.S. involvement in the Indo-Pacific as crucial for stability. In a joint statement, President Joseph R. Biden, Jr. and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have reaffirmed their vision for a robust and strategic partnership between the United States and India, built on democratic values and mutual respect. In talks of semiconductors and telecommunications, the two nations signed an MOU to coordinate semiconductor incentive programs, which will lead to significant investments and job creation in both countries. They also pledged to work together on responsible AI, supporting India's leadership in the global partnership on AI and encouraging investment in Indian AI startups. On the climate front, Biden and Modi emphasized their shared commitment to the clean energy transition through the USIndia Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership. They announced new initiatives for green hydrogen, renewable energy technologies, and investment platforms for clean energy projects. They also agreed on the importance of decarbonizing transportation and creating a global biofuels alliance. Additionally, they pledged to strengthen critical minerals supply chains and advance nuclear energy as a key component of their climate strategies. India and the United States are clearly aligned in their values and visions for the future, reflecting a strong and positive alliance. Both countries emphasize democratic principles, human rights, and a commitment to a rules-based international order. Their collaboration spans critical areas such as technology, defense, and clean energy, demonstrating a shared ambition to tackle global challenges and advance mutual interests. This alignment not only strengthens their bilateral relationship, but also positions them as key partners in shaping a prosperous and resilient future for their nations and the international community. But is this really true? Is there more to this alliance, and are there nuances that we need to look further into? The US-India partnership, despite its promising potential, faces significant challenges that could strain future relations. While the alliance between the world's oldest democracy, the US, and the world's largest democracy, India, offers strategic advantages, particularly in countering China, there are deep-seated frictions. Concerns about democratic backsliding under Prime Minister Modi's Hindu nationalist government, issues with human rights and civil liberties, and conflicting interests on climate policy and Russia complicate the relationship. Moreover, recent incidents, such as allegations of extrajudicial killings and diplomatic tensions over internal affairs, highlight the fragile nature of this partnership and suggest that while cooperation may continue, it will need to navigate these complex and evolving issues. The U.S. is not positioned to replace Russia as the primary supplier of military equipment to India. Many in Moscow are concerned about the future of Russia's role in the Indian defense market, where its share has decreased from 64% to 45% over the past decade, while the combined influence of France and the U.S. has grown to 40%. Moreover, Russia's ongoing military operations might lead to further restrictions on its ability to supply arms to India. as the Russian defense sector will prioritize its own needs over those of foreign partners. There is also concern that U.S. pressure on India and Chinese pressure on Russia might further limit Russian-Indian defense cooperation. It is also unlikely that a free trade agreement will emerge between the United States and India. Despite India's numerous trade agreements with over 50 countries, it remains relatively protectionist. Many observers note that the current U.S. strategy towards India lacks major initiatives for modernizing the Indian economy. Under both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, U.S.-India relations have focused on American commercial interests rather than on strategic economic modernization for India. But, as you've learned from the previous videos in this channel before, there are no alliances that are simple. So maybe this is normal between two nations. If the relationship with the U.S. and India is strengthened successfully amidst the few hiccups, could it help contribute to a bigger picture? How will the U.S.-India relations help the Indo Pacific?
And now, United States has lauded India's key role in preventing a revisionist challenge of the status quo.
Under Prime Minister Modi, India has significantly increased its engagement in the South China Sea, heightening concerns in Beijing about India's potential role as a troublemaker in the region, a term typically reserved for the United States. Modi's administration has actively expanded military and diplomatic ties with claimant states such as the Philippines and Vietnam, and it is likely that India will continue to extend its presence in the South China Sea, exerting increasing pressure on China. However, it remains improbable that India will emerge as a major player in the South China Sea disputes in the immediate future. Since Modi took office, India has moved beyond its previous neutral stance on the South China Sea, which was evident when India only took note of the 2016 arbitral tribunal's ruling on China's claims. Instead, India has significantly deepened its involvement in the disputes. India has also ramped up military support for the Philippines and Vietnam, including a deal for BrahMos supersonic anti-ship missiles with the Philippines in January 2022, and the delivery of a light missile frigate to Vietnam in June 2023. In response to escalating tensions between China and the Philippines, India recently offered helicopters to the Philippine Coast Guard for humanitarian and rescue missions, though Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. also noted that the helicopters would aid maritime operations against China. The shift in India's stance became evident at the India-Philippines Foreign Ministers meeting in June, where India endorsed adherence to international law and the 2016 arbitral award, marking a departure from its previous neutral position. In New Delhi, analysts suggest that India is eager to be part of a larger international effort to counter China's ambitions in the South China Sea. Sriram Chaulia, dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs, explained, BrahMos missile delivery to the Philippines is in itself not a game changer, but the idea is that we are part of a broader coalition of countries, including the U.S., trying to build up the muscle and shore up the security of smaller countries like the Philippines. It is what we call lattice work strategy. Jonathan Malaya, Assistant Director General of the Philippine National Security Council, informed reporters in Manila that these missiles will be used by the Philippine Marines. This adds an important and practical layer of deterrence for the Philippines amidst its limited military resources vis-a-vis China. Geopolitical analyst Don McLean Gill told VOA via email. He added that the missiles will bolster its coastal defense to more effectively exercise its sovereignty and sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea at a time when China has been relentlessly pursuing its expansionist ambitions against international law. Furthermore, India is highly unlikely to engage in a conflict over Taiwan. However, it has significant economic and security interests, as well as effective policy tools to help prevent such a conflict from occurring. New Delhi is motivated by three main factors to work towards avoiding a crisis over Taiwan. Firstly, India has a vested interest in maintaining the current situation, where Taiwan remains a self-governing entity that has not declared independence. Since 2001, trade between India and Taiwan has increased sevenfold, and the two are exploring a potential free trade agreement. Secondly, any Chinese aggression towards Taiwan would have severe repercussions for India. Such a conflict would disrupt global trade with China and Taiwan, causing significant economic turbulence across Asia and the Middle East. A Bloomberg study estimates that the costs of such a conflict could exceed 10% of global GDP. India's economy would face a greater shock than the U.S. economy, impacting its key sectors, from electronics to pharmaceuticals, which would suffer from shortages of essential components and materials. Thirdly, while the immediate impact of such a conflict would be disastrous, the long-term consequences could further weaken India's international position, depending on the outcome. A limited conflict in which China gains a strategic advantage could lead to a Chinese victory over Taiwan and a defeat for the U.S. and its allies. India's experiences with Chinese aggression along the Himalayan border have disillusioned officials about Beijing's intentions. As the world's largest democracy, India is a prominent figure in the ideological struggle between democratic nations and autocracies that President Biden highlights. The Biden administration views India as crucial for the Quad Alliance's vision of a free and open Indo Pacific and has provided intelligence support during the 2020 Himalayan clash. India has been strengthening its presence in Southeast Asia through naval exercises and arms sales, complicating China's strategies. Kurt Campbell, a key figure in Biden's Asia policy, regards India as the U.S.'s most significant partner in the 21st century. However, India is unlikely to enter a formal alliance with the U.S. due to its historical independence, and Prime Minister Modi's questionable commitment to democratic norms and reluctance to fully support the liberal international order, as shown by its stance on the Ukraine conflict. In an online thread raising the question who would win in a war between India and China, a user answered, "As a Chinese, I firmly believe that India will definitely defeat China. India has the largest population in the world and is the fastest growing economy. India has the capability to independently build excellent fighter jets like the Tejas and tanks like the Arjun. They have successfully thrown a lunar probe to the moon, and the Indian people are born warriors with a strong fighting spirit that no weapon can destroy." Mumbai, India's level of development, is second only to New York and is 20 years ahead of Shanghai and Tokyo. There is no doubt that India can simultaneously defeat China and Japan, and even contend with the integration of East Asia and Southeast Asia. A history enthusiast added, "The truth is that China and India are strategically close with numerous countries, which has the potential to escalate the conflict into a world war. India and China go to war, countries like Japan and Pakistan would be tempted and invited to join, because an imbalance in power between India and China is a terrible news for both of them. India will get indirect support from countries like USA, Russia, Israel, EU to counter the Chinese growth, as India is seen as the only possible countercard of the world against China. To counter this, China will lure nations like Palestine and North Korea into war." Both users raise contrasting points, but let's look into the facts to truly know the answer to this question. In June 2020, a violent confrontation between Indian and Chinese forces in the Galwan River Valley, a disputed region in the Himalayas, resulted in the deaths of at least 20 Indian soldiers. The root of the clash lay in India's construction of a strategic road in the Galwan Valley, completed in 2019, which enhanced its ability to move troops and supplies to a high-altitude forward air base at Daulat Beg Oldi. China perceived this infrastructure as a direct challenge to its territorial claims and military interests in the region. The Chinese military's increased presence and fortifications in the area had been a response to this perceived threat, leading to the confrontation. China significantly understated its military losses in the Galwan Valley clash with India in June 2020. While the official Chinese count acknowledged only 4 soldier fatalities, new findings suggest that the actual number of PLA casualties was at least 9 times higher. This discrepancy reveals that the Chinese government concealed the true scale of its losses from the public and international community. The clash, which occurred along the contested line of actual control, LAC, resulted in a deadly confrontation between Indian and Chinese troops in a high-altitude region of the Himalayas. India's resolve in confronting China, as demonstrated in conflicts like the Galwan Valley clash, reveals a nation willing to stand firm against aggressive expansionism. However, India's efforts alone are not enough to counter China's strategic ambitions in the Indo Pacific region. The strength of India's stance against China is amplified by its growing alliances with the US and other key partners. These alliances are pivotal in creating a unified front to resist China's extension tactics and ensure a stable, free Indo-Pacific. By collaborating with allies, India can leverage collective security arrangements and diplomatic support to challenge China's regional dominance effectively. In this geopolitical balancing act, India's bravery combined with international cooperation represents a formidable strategy to safeguard the interests of the Indo-Pacific and maintain a rules-based order in the region. Thanks for watching.